I am the most powerful person in the world, having lived in seclusion for many years, spending my days in the mountains tending to flowers and vegetables for a decade. The cultivation world has gradually seen the rise of many great swordmasters and spellcasting grandmasters. Rumors about me grew fewer and fewer until one day, my vegetable patch was ruined by a fool who suddenly broke through my barrier. She was crying so pitifully. While apologizing, she propped up the fence of my vegetable patch. I finally managed to join the Zhan Tian sect, but no one is willing to take me as their disciple. They all say I'm too clumsy. They refuse to teach me, but my mother clearly said I was exceptionally gifted. I looked at this child. I couldn't sense a single trace of spiritual energy in her entire body. There was no way that could be linked to being exceptionally gifted. But she was just so noisy. I reluctantly took her as my disciple. Who would have thought she was actually a Chaos Dao body, a rarity seen once in 10,000 years. Those old, blind fools from the Zhan Tian sect nearly destroyed a priceless, uncut gem. And so, 5 years passed. Zhang Xiaomian went from being a mortal girl who couldn't even guide qi into her body to a graceful young woman. Her cultivation level has also steadily reached the late-stage golden core. Every day, aside from cultivating, she helps me tend to the vegetable patch, does the laundry, and cooks. Life in the valley is simple and hard, but she finds joy in it. One day, I came back from fishing and saw her using a small water diversion spell to water the vegetable patch. Her technique was already quite skilled. Xiaomian, I called out to her. She immediately stopped and ran to me. She obediently took the fish basket. Master, you're back. Your cultivation is now stable. You can leave the mountain, I said calmly. She froze. The smile on her face instantly vanished. Her eyes immediately turned red. Master, are you abandoning me? Go back to the Zhan Tian sect. I ignored her tears and continued speaking. 5 years ago, they called you useless. They cut off your path to immortality. 5 years later, you will go back and tell them that they were the blind ones. How can a disciple of mine bear the title of useless for a lifetime? But she bit her lip, her eyes filled with reluctance. No, but, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. You should go and reclaim what belongs to you. Those people who once looked down on you, you must make them look up to you. I took out a jade pendant from my robe. It was of an ancient style, with only the character, Lu, carved on it. This is a protective artifact I've nurtured with my own lifeblood for 100 years. Wear it. I tied the jade pendant to her waist. In this world, there are not many who can harm you now. Go, come back when you're done. Zhang Xiaomian knew she couldn't argue with me and could only nod through her tears. She kowtowed to me 3 times. Master, take care. Your disciple will definitely not bring you shame. She walked away, looking back with every step, until her figure finally disappeared at the end of the valley. The valley returned to its usual tranquility, as if nothing had ever happened. After Xiaomian left the mountain, my days returned to a boring quietness. Except for occasionally remembering how clumsy that girl was when she watered the plants. Nothing was different. This quietness lasted for less than 10 days. Then, one afternoon, I was watering a cabbage when a sharp pain suddenly shot through my heart. It felt as if I'd been struck hard by an invisible hammer. The water ladle in my hand clattered to the ground. Water splashed all over my pant leg. It was the jade pendant. It shattered. A wave of bone-chilling killing intent surged up from the depths of my soul in an instant. A feeling I hadn't experienced in 10 years. That jade pendant had been nourished with my own lifeblood for 100 years. It also carried a wisp of my divine sense. Even a nascent soul master wanting to harm Xiaomian would have to get past the pendant first. To be able to shatter it, the attacker must have at least a spirit transformation cultivation level. In this cultivation world, when did another spirit transformation master appear? No, that's not right. A spirit transformation cultivator's divine sense is incredibly powerful. It's impossible that they didn't notice the aura of my cultivation technique on the pendant, since he recognized my aura and still dared to strike such a heavy blow. He must be coming for me. Very well, I walked to the center of the vegetable patch, where a crooked wooden stick was stuck in the ground. I'd casually placed it there 10 years ago to serve as a trellis for the bean vines. Exposed to the wind and sun, the wooden stick was now completely rotten. As if it would crumble at a touch, I gripped the top of the stick and slowly pulled it out of the damp earth. As the dirt crumbled away, a deep, cold glint flashed in the sunlight. The rotten outer layer of the stick flaked away, revealing the rust-covered blade of a sword within. On the blade were carved two ancient seal characters, almost obscured by rust. Ask the heavens. It hasn't tasted blood in 10 years. I wonder if my old friend has grown lonely too. I held the sword and walked under the eaves, where a chipped orchid pot sat. The orchid inside had long since withered, leaving only a pod of dry soil. I lifted my foot and kicked the pot, shattering it to pieces. Amidst the flying dust and ceramic shards from the damp soil, I uncovered a package wrapped in oil paper. The paper had long since rotted away. It disintegrated into dust at the slightest touch, revealing a stack of talismans, yellowed and dark with age. The cinnabar script on them was faded and indistinct, and they gave off a musty smell. I tucked the talismans into my robe and held the sword in one hand. Standing in the courtyard, it's been 10 years. I've been in seclusion in these mountains for a full 10 years. Have the people of this world already forgotten my name? Forgotten the fear of my blade hanging over their heads? A bunch of ignorant fools, establishing their own sects right under my nose. Proclaiming themselves the righteous path, and now they've become so arrogant they dare to harm someone of mine. I took a single step, and my figure vanished from the valley, leaving behind only a ravaged vegetable garden and shattered flower pots. It seems it is time for this world to once again remember the name Liu Beimu. The lingering aura from the shattered jade pendant led me eastward. I did not ride a sword. I simply walked at an unhurried pace. With every step I took, mountains and rivers beneath me retreated 100 miles. After 10 years in seclusion, the spiritual energy in this world seems to have grown much thinner, and with it, the quality of cultivators has also severely declined. Arriving at a mountain relay station, I overheard the conversation of several young cultivators. They were dressed in fine clothes, their swords extraordinary. Their faces were filled with arrogance. A single glance told you they were from a prestigious sect. Have you heard? That good-for-nothing from the Xuanxin sect, Zhang Xiaomian, by some stroke of dumb luck, actually succeeded in her foundation establishment while training outside. So what if she established her foundation? She's a good-for-nothing who can't even externally release her spiritual energy. Even after establishing her foundation, she's still the lowest of the low. I heard she even injured senior brother Jiyu Yunfei. How utterly audacious. Senior brother Jiyu is the sect master's personal disciple, a child favored by the heavens. That good-for-nothing must have used some underhanded, demonic trick. I heard the sect has already captured her and is interrogating her on the punishment platform in front of the mountain gate. The hand holding my teacup paused. I slowly walked over. Standing before their table, I asked in a calm voice, "The Xuanxin sect, which way is it?" The young man in brocade robes, who seemed to be the leader, looked me up and down. Seeing my coarse linen clothes and the rusty, broken sword in my hand, a flash of unconcealed contempt crossed his eyes. "Who are you? Is the Xuanxin sect a place someone like you can ask about? Get lost. Don't be an eyesore here." I said no more. I just flicked my finger, and an almost invisible stream of sword chi flew from my fingertip, silently sweeping past their table. The group was stunned for a moment, then realized in horror at the enchanted swords hanging at their waists, their source of pride had all snapped in two, the cuts as smooth as a mirror. The broken tips of the swords clattered to the ground. They didn't even see how I had struck. "You." The young man in brocade robes turned deathly pale. The hand he pointed at me with was trembling uncontrollably. "Now, can you tell me the way?" My tone remained just as calm. They scrambled in terror to point out the direction, not daring to speak another word. So these are the young prodigies of the cultivation world today. They can't even withstand a single one of my most ordinary streams of sword chi. How boring. Following the direction they pointed, in less than the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, a majestic, immortal mountain appeared before my eyes. On the giant archway of the mountain gate, the 3 characters for Xuanxin sect were written in a grand, sweeping style, displaying the vibrant energy of this up-and-coming sect. A pity, this vitality will come to an end today. In front of the mountain gate, a crowd was packed shoulder to shoulder, 3 layers deep both inside and out. I passed through the crowd with ease and saw the scene in the center of the plaza. Zhang Xiaomian was bound to a black stone pillar with chains as thick as a man's arm. She was covered in blood, her once clean clothes whipped to shreds. Lash marks so deep you could see bone were revealed, and her breathing was faint. Her head hung limply, and she had clearly fallen into a semi-conscious state. Standing before her was a smug, young man. This must be the Jiyu Yunfei they were talking about. He held a long whip that crackled with lightning. He looked down on Zhang Xiaomian, his eyes filled with sadistic glee and contempt. Tell me, that dark magic of yours. Which master of the vile arts taught it to you? Jiyu Yunfei cracked his whip. The lightning exploded, adding another scorched, blackened wound to Zhang Xiaomian's back. She shuddered in agony, but she only bit her lip, refusing to make a sound. You're a tough one, aren't you? Jiyu Yunfei sneered. He demanded sharply, who is your master? Who would dare teach a monster like you? Tell me, and I might just grant you a quick death. The surrounding Xuanxin sect disciples erupted in laughter, pointing and jeering at the bound girl. I watched the lightning whip about to fall. I saw the crisscrossing wounds on my disciples' back. I saw the contemptuous smiles on their faces. And I raised my hand. The rust-spotted Wen Tian sword in my hand let out a soft hum. The next moment, a streak of light, impossibly fast, shot across the great distance. Jiyu Yunfei, who was about to swing his whip, had the twisted smile on his face freeze. He looked down in disbelief at the simple iron sword protruding from his chest. Its tip was still dripping with warm blood. The entire square fell silent. All eyes were fixed on the sword in Jiyu Yunfei's chest. Then, their gaze traveled along the blade to see me, standing at the edge of the square. I walked forward slowly. With every step I took, the life drained from Jiyu Yunfei's body. By the time I reached him, the light in his eyes had completely faded. I ignored his lifeless body, my gaze sweeping over all the horrified members of the Xuanxin sect. My voice was cold and filled with rage. Her master is me, and you. Do you have any last words? As my words faded, there was dead silence, and then came a surging tide of fear. A few disciples in the front row couldn't even stand steady, their legs gave out from under them. And they collapsed to the ground. An old man in an elder's robes stepped out from the crowd and pointed at me. He shouted, trying to sound brave, "You audacious fiend! To commit murder before the gates of my Xuanxin sect. To kill the sect master's personal disciple. You." I had no interest in wasting words with him. I just gave him a passing glance. But in that glance was a sliver of the sword intent I hadn't used in 10 years. Zhang Jingshan's voice died in his throat. The look of anger and terror on his face froze solid. The next second, fine lines of blood burst from beneath his skin. His whole body was like a shattered piece of porcelain. Silently, he crumbled into a pile of bloody dust. Not even his primordial spirit managed to escape. It's unclear who let out the first scream. The entire square instantly erupted into chaos as countless disciples fled backward in a panic, trying to hide within the sect and activate the Grand Protective Array. Quick, activate the array. Following a dull, loud boom, the entire main peak of the Mystic Sky sect trembled as a massive, pale blue barrier of light shot up into the sky. Like a giant inverted bowl, enveloping the entire sect gate. On the light barrier, countless profound runes flowed, emanating an ancient and majestic aura. This was the foundation of the Mystic Sky sect, established for hundreds of years. It was said to be able to withstand the full force attack of a transformation stage cultivator. I looked at those disciples who, having hidden behind the light barrier, stared at me, still shaken. Their gazes were a mix of venom and relief. It made me want to laugh. They thought they were safe now. Carrying Wen Tian, I walked slowly to the front of the massive light barrier. I raised my hand, and with the tip of my sword, I lightly tapped the shimmering array. Ting! A sound as crisp as jade striking jade rang out. With the point of contact as the center, a barely visible crack suddenly appeared and spread outwards at a terrifying speed. Crack! In an instant, cracks like a spiderweb covered the entire light barrier. Those Mystic Sky sect disciples who originally thought they were safe, their expressions of relief turned to utter horror. With a loud bang, the supposedly indestructible Grand Protective Array, just like that, under my single tap, shattered into countless specks of light, dissipating into nothing. Next, it was time for the hunt. My figure vanished, becoming an uncatchable phantom, weaving through the terrified, fleeing crowd. That outer sect disciple who once mocked Xiao Mian for not even being able to guide Qi into his body, the edge of the Wen Tian sword sliced across his neck. The sneer on his face was frozen forever. That inner sect senior sister who once deliberately splashed dirty water On Xiao Mian, a paper talisman flew from my sleeve. It transformed into a sky-scorching flame, turning her and her screams into ash, and those at the foot of the punishment platform who laughed and jeered. I remember every single one of their faces. In my hand, the Wen Tian sword seemed to have a life of its own. With every swing, it precisely took the life of someone who had once bullied my disciple. Blood stained the white jade steps before the sect gate. Agonized screams rose one after another. This was no longer a sacred immortal land, but the Avicii hell. The sword formations they were so proud of were like child's play before me. The magical treasures they relied on to survive shattered to pieces upon contact with my sword chi. Fear, unprecedented fear, gripped everyone's heart. They finally realized that the one they had provoked was not an ordinary rogue cultivator at all. Just as I was about to slay the last one, the deacon elder who had laid a hand on Xiao Mian, an imposing aura, dozens of times more powerful than Zhang Jingshan's, suddenly erupted from the depths of the main peak, sweeping across the entire Xuanshan sect. A majestic and furious voice, like rolling thunder from the heavens, boomed in my ears. What foul beast dares to run rampant in my Xuanshan sect? Following that furious roar, a streak of light shot out from the summit of the main peak. In the blink of an eye, it landed in the center of the plaza. The newcomer was dressed in the black Taoist robes of a sect master, with gold thread trim and a purple gold crown on his head. His features were refined, giving him the air of a celestial immortal. Spiritual energy surged around him. Clearly, his cultivation had reached the late spirit transformation stage, making him a great cultivator. The moment he landed, he saw the ground covered in corpses and pools of blood. On his face, which had been reasonably majestic, a twisted killing intent appeared in an instant, his gaze as sharp as a blade. He locked his gaze firmly on me. It was you who killed my disciples. In his voice was an uncontainable rage. I didn't answer. I just held the still dripping Wen Tian and sized him up with great interest. My silence was the ultimate provocation in his eyes. He was so furious, he began to laugh. Very good, I am Xiao Yi. In the 300 years since I founded the Xuanshan sect, you are the first person to dare act so outrageously in this place. Today, I will rip out your soul and refine it, damning you so that you may never be reincarnated. Before his words had faded, something suddenly appeared behind him. Green immortal sword. The moment the sword appeared, the sound of its ringing echoed through the clouds, carrying with it a sharp aura capable of sundering the very heavens. It stirred the winds and clouds, causing them to change color. It's the sect master's natal artifact, the Qingshan sword. The sect master is making his move. This fiend is finished. The surviving disciples' eyes lit up with renewed hope, as if they had just seen their savior. Xiao Yi formed a sword seal with his hand and chanted an incantation. The Qingshan sword flared with a brilliant light, transforming into a green blade of energy dozens of yards long, slashing down right at my head. This one strike drew upon the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Its power was truly extraordinary, enough to split mountains and sunder peaks. And yet, just watched quietly, even feeling a little urge to laugh. This opening stance, this method of circulating spiritual energy, the flawed imitation of the Tao's essence in this sword technique, it was all too familiar. Although he had haphazardly modified it himself, turning it into a bizarre mess, and it was riddled with flaws, I still recognized it at a single glance. Weren't these the drafts I casually scribbled on some scratch paper a few hundred years ago, when I had nothing better to do? To explore the variations of the sword Tao? I remember that later, those pieces of scratch paper were used to prop up a wobbly table leg. I never imagined they'd actually be passed down and treated as some supreme secret manual by an absolute fool. I lifted my head and looked closely at Xiao Yi, at that face twisted with rage. From a corner of my deepest memories, a young and fawning face superimposed itself over his. So it was him, back when we were in the sect, the one with mediocre talent who always liked to follow me around, calling me Senior Brother Lu over and over again. My ambitious junior brother. I never thought that with just a few useless pages I threw away, he'd actually managed to become a sect master. How unpredictable the world can be. Seeing that cyan sword aura, powerful enough to cleave a mountain in two, about to land on my head, I finally made my move. I didn't use a sword. I didn't even summon any spiritual energy for protection. I simply extended two fingers, my index and my middle finger. And gently, I caught the very tip of that sword aura. Boom, the ferocious sword Qi, with me at its center, blasted outwards, destroying all the remaining buildings. Yet it couldn't even stir the corner of my robe. The vicious glee and pride on Xiao Yi's face froze. It was replaced by sheer bewilderment and terror. He was utterly unable to comprehend what was happening. This is impossible. He frantically channeled his spiritual energy, trying to force the azure profound sword forward even an inch. I watched his futile struggle and spoke faintly. These shoddy, third-rate skills. Who taught you? My words were like a needle, piercing the last of his pride. Xiao Yi's face instantly turned crimson. He roared, pouring every last bit of his spiritual energy into the azure profound sword. The blade began to tremble violently, emitting a hum as if it were about to break under the strain. Trying to break free from my finger's grasp. Break, he gave it his all. The cyan light on the sword's tip was so bright that you could hardly open your eyes. But it was a pity. A firefly, in the end, is still just a firefly. I was growing impatient. With the slightest pressure from my fingertips, a crisp, mournful cry echoed across the plaza. Before the terrified eyes of everyone present, the sword that the profound heaven sect disciples regarded as a divine weapon, the azure profound sword, starting from the tip, began to shatter inch by inch. Countless cyan shards clattered to the ground. ****. His bonded weapon destroyed, Xiao Yi's spirit was violently shaken. He instantly spat out a large mouthful of blood, and in that moment, he seemed to age several decades. His aura weakened to an extreme degree. He staggered backward, pointing at me, his eyes filled with nothing but pure terror and disbelief. You, who in the world are you? I couldn't be bothered to waste any more words on him. I withdrew my fingers and began to walk toward him, one step at a time. My steps were slow and light, but each one felt as though it was landing on everyone's heart. Under this invisible pressure, the surviving disciples and elders retreated again and again. Some even felt their legs go weak, collapsing right onto the ground. Xiao Yi wanted to run, but he was locked in place by my aura, his body as rigid as a stone. He couldn't even move a single finger. He could only watch helplessly as I approached. I walked up to him as he watched me slowly raise my palm. A flash of resolve crossed his eyes. It seemed he wanted to detonate his primordial spirit and take me down with him. In front of me, you don't even have the right to self-destruct, I said faintly, my palm landing lightly on his lower abdomen, right over his dantian. Just a gentle press. Then I pulled it back. Xiao Yi's entire body trembled as if struck by lightning. He shuddered violently and looked down at his own dantian. His face was first blank with confusion, then consumed by endless despair. The spiritual energy he had painstakingly cultivated for hundreds of years was like a flood bursting through a dam, gushing wildly from every pore in his body, returning to the heavens and the earth. His incomparably sturdy sea of qi was now like a punctured ball, no longer able to hold even a single shred of spiritual energy. His cultivation level was plummeting at a visible rate. Soul formation, nascent soul, golden core, foundation establishment, until finally, he was reduced to a mere mortal, unable to ever cultivate again. Ah! My cultivation! Xiao Yi let out a heart-wrenching, blood-curdling scream. He collapsed to the ground like a fish out of water. Twitching futilely, he lay on the ground. Gasping for breath, his cloudy eyes locked on me. It seemed he was trying to find something in my techniques, in my overwhelmingly domineering style. To find some familiar trace. The fear that had been sealed in the deepest part of his memory was being awakened, bit by bit. He remembered, from hundreds of years ago, the silhouette of that figure who dominated an entire era like a god or a demon. He remembered the fragmented cultivation manual that man had casually discarded, which he himself had treated as a priceless treasure. He remembered that man's supreme sword intent, which could drain the color from the sky and earth with nonchalant ease. This seemingly ordinary man before him and that legendary figure slowly merged into one. His pupils contracted sharply, his lips trembled as he finally used the last ounce of his strength to force out a few words. You are Liu Beimu. I looked down on him, with not a ripple of emotion in my eyes, as if I were just looking at an ant. Crippling Xiao Yi was just the beginning. I didn't even spare him another glance. This ant, who had once hopped about quite cheerfully, was no longer worth any of my attention. My gaze slowly lifted, landing on the distant main peak that soared into the clouds. Over there was the foundation of the profound sky sect, the source that supported this sect's 100 years of fortune, its spirit vein. 10 years. Ever since I went into seclusion on South Mountain, this sword, named Wenshin, had been casually stuck in my vegetable garden, serving as a stake for 10 years. Cucumbers have been tied to it, and beanstalks have wrapped around it. The killing intent on its blade had long been washed clean by the aura of a simple, worldly life. But now, it seemed to sense its master's will, and began to let out a low, excited hum. Model. I have tended a garden for 10 years, and I have nurtured my sword for 10 years. Today, I shall let this world be reminded of the sharpness of this blade. Calmly, I raised Wenshin above my head. In that instant, the wind ceased. The clouds froze. The entire world seemed as if someone had pressed pause. All sound, all color, was stripped away in an instant. In all of heaven and earth, only one thing was left. And that was the aura emanating from me, from the edge of my sword. The sword intent, condensed to its absolute peak, overflowing wildly. It was not the brilliant golden light of spiritual energy, nor the world-destroying power of demonic energy, but rather, a pure will, so sharp it could slice through all creation. The surviving disciples of the profound heaven sect discovered, to their horror, that the grand mountain protecting Arae they took such pride in was like ice and snow under the sun before this sword intent. Silently melting, disintegrating without a trace. Then, I brought my sword down in a single strike. There was no earth-shattering roar, not even the slightest sound. With this one strike, time and space themselves seemed to lose all meaning. A gray streak of sword energy, invisible to the naked eye, shot forth from the blade. It appeared slow, but in reality, it moved faster than anyone could perceive. It flew straight towards the main peak of the profound heaven sect. A dead silence fell over everything. A moment later, crack. A faint cracking sound was heard, as if it were some kind of signal. Then, under the horrified stares of all who watched, a sight they would never forget for the rest of their lives. The main peak of the profound heaven sect, which had stood for hundreds of years, began to crack from its very summit. A fissure of unfathomable depth instantly tore through the entire mountain. Rumble. The delayed roar, loud enough to shatter eardrums, finally swept across the land. The massive spirit vein that sustained the profound heaven sect was brutally severed by this single, incomparably domineering strike. An immeasurable amount of pure spiritual energy erupted from it like a bursting dam, transforming into a tempest that raged in all directions. The mountain began to crumble, giant boulders tumbling down, palaces toppled into ruin. This sect, which had risen to prominence in the cultivation world, hailed as the leader of the new generation, was reduced to this right before my very eyes. A field of utter ruin. The tempest subsided. As the dust settled, I stood there, sword in hand. I walked slowly to where the mountain gate, now rubble, once stood. The tip of my sword traced a line across the ground, like an iron brush on parchment, sending shards of stone flying. A deep scar was left upon the ruins, its strokes sharp and commanding. It radiated a killing intent so potent that any cultivator who saw it, even 1,000 years from now, would still feel a chill run down their spine. And on it was a single sentence: to those who would harm my disciple, this sect is your fate. From this day forward, the name Lu Beimu, the Sword Venerable, would no longer be a mere legend, but a new nightmare, hanging over the entire cultivation world. After all that was done, I casually slung the Wenshin sword over my shoulder, as if I were carrying a hoe. Behind me was the sect's gate, now reduced to ruins, and that line carved deep into the earth. A sword scar deep enough to strike fear into the hearts of all future cultivators. Before me was the dead silent plaza and those who had collapsed to the ground, their eyes vacant, as if their very souls had been ripped away. Survivors of the Xuanxin sect. I didn't spare them a single glance. I began to walk, heading toward the punishment pillar at the center of the plaza. The air was thick with the heavy stench of blood and dust, as well as an aura of fear so palpable it had almost become solid. I didn't care. I walked straight up to the punishment pillar. My young disciple, Zhang Xiaomian, was bound to that cold, black iron pillar. Her once lively face was now ashen pale, her breathing so faint it seemed it could stop at any moment. But she was still conscious. She lifted her head and saw me. In her eyes, which had lost all their light, a faint glimmer suddenly appeared, only to be drowned by a flood of tears. The chains that bound her were forged from refined frost iron, a magical artifact designed specifically to seal a cultivator's spiritual veins. I couldn't even be bothered to draw my sword. I simply held out 2 fingers and flicked the chains lightly. Clang! A clear, crisp sound echoed, like a snapping zither string. The incredibly sturdy black iron chains shattered, piece by piece, turning into a pile of fine dust on the ground. Having lost her support, Zhang Xiaomian's body slumped forward. I reached out and caught her in my arms. So light, lighter than the biggest winter melon in my vegetable garden. Master, she rested against my chest, using every last bit of her strength to choke out those 2 words. After that, she couldn't speak anymore, just clutched desperately at my robes. Her silent tears soaking through to my chest. I could feel it. Her spiritual veins were on the verge of shattering, and her internal organs were severely damaged. I placed a hand on her back, and a gentle, pure stream of spiritual energy began to flow slowly into her body, mending her damaged meridians and stabilizing her fading life force. Her body stopped trembling, and her breathing gradually steadied. I looked down at the disciple in my arms, who was crying like a stray kitten. My heart, which had been as still as an old well for 10 years, was finally stirred. "It's all right now," I said softly. My voice wasn't loud, yet it carried clearly across the entire dead silent plaza. "Your master is taking you home." After saying that, I turned and walked away, carrying her in my arms. Behind me were countless gazes filled with terror, awe, and bewilderment. It was the destruction of a sect, and the rebirth of a legend. But I didn't look back as I walked far into the distance. The breathing of Zhang Xiaomian in my arms finally stabilized a little. She nuzzled against me and, with a voice thick with congestion, asked me softly in a voice as faint as a mosquito's buzz, "Master, are we still going back to South Mountain?" "We are, of course we are." I held her, and step by step, walked back to South Mountain. The ruins of the Xuanxin sect, the tremors in the cultivation world, the panic of the 100 sects, none of it had anything to do with me anymore. My world had once again shrunk to this small patch of land on South Mountain. And to this little apprentice in my arms, whom I had lost and found again. The little wooden cabin was still the same. The flowers and plants in the courtyard, during the few days I was gone, were still being nourished well by the formation. I took Zhang Xiaomian, and gently placed her on the bed in her own room. Due to the exhaustion of her spiritual energy and her severe injuries, she had already fallen into a deep sleep. I didn't use any complicated medicinal pills. I just drew from the source of the spirit spring on the back mountain, using this world's purest spiritual energy to cleanse her wounds. Afterwards, I pulled out a dust-covered wooden box from under the bed. From inside, I casually picked out a dark, round pill and popped it into her mouth. This was something I'd refined for fun back in the day. I'd long forgotten its specific effects, only remembering that I used to eat them like candy beans. Because the spiritual energy was so potent, it was a bit overwhelming. After doing all this, I went back to my life of growing vegetables, fishing, and dozing off. The only difference was, I now had a little shadow following me around. After Zhang Xiaomian woke up, she was no longer as boisterous as before, nor did she cry at the drop of a hat. She just became quieter and more diligent. Every day before dawn, she would go out into the courtyard on her own and practice the sword moves I taught her, over and over again. After experiencing life and death, the potential of her Chaos Dao body was completely unleashed. The spiritual energy in her body was no longer a pool of stagnant water, but like a great, surging river. Every time she swung her sword, it carried a sharp aura that surprised even me. Her Dao heart, in blood and fire, had been forged to be incomparably firm. I remained as lazy as ever. I stuck the Wenshin sword back into the vegetable patch. Occasionally, when I felt it was in the way, I'd pull it out and use its sharp blade to peel some fruit, or use the flat of the blade to swat a few clueless flies. Those ancient talismans from under the flower pot that had been unearthed, I stuffed them back under. I even packed the dirt down a bit, so they wouldn't get washed out again someday when I was watering the plants. Everything was the same as 10 years ago, unbelievably peaceful. It was as if the massacre that washed the Xuanxin sect in blood was just a forgotten dream. But the cultivation world did not forget. Occasionally, some clueless, young cultivator would fly by on their sword, still 100 miles away from my barrier, and would seem to hit an invisible wall, turning back to flee in utter terror. Gradually, within a 1,000-mile radius of South Mountain, it became a forbidden zone in the cultivation world. And as for the rumors about me, they have spread through the cultivation world in countless versions. Some say, the sword Venerable Lu Baimu has re-emerged to cleanse his own sect. Others say he had long since fallen to the demonic path, and on that day was after an ancient demonic artifact. Still others say, he actually died long ago, and that this is an ancient archdemon who has been reborn through possession. But all the rumors share a common conclusion. You can provoke anyone in the world, but you must never set foot in that vegetable patch on South Mountain. And more importantly, you must not harm that little girl who is said to be a huge crybaby.